see what I see?
Hopefully.
Well, I don't think I want to leave the webinar. Hold on.
Don't do that.
No, I don't want to do that. Okay. All right. So, thank you for joining in today. If you're watching live or if you're watching this recorded later on, I appreciate you taking the time. We're going to talk a little bit about, and probably tell you more than you wanted to know about fall color change and why does it happen and how does it happen. And as Marnie said, I am one of she and Kathy's colleagues. I'm a professor and I'm a state extension silviculture specialist. So if you have any questions, my email address is there on the screen as well. It's just londo.2. Okay. And it won't advance. Isn't technology just great?
Are you clicked on your screen?
There we go. God, you're smart, Marnie. Thank you.
Got to make up for that calling you Gary.
Well, you just bailed me out yet again. So anyway, it's that time of year. I know a lot of the comments that I was able to catch of those joining in the webinar talking about what the fall colors look like in your part of the world. And during the fall, as we all know, it's marked by a series of chemical changes that happens in the leaves of trees. And they'll go from green to different shades of red, orange, yellow, or gold. Some of them eventually just turn brown on the tree. But have you ever really thought about what causes those color changes, and what does that mean for our forests? And one of the things I liked about putting this presentation together is I got to put in all sorts of really cool fall color pictures. So you'll see a lot of fall color pictures here. I'd apologize, but you tuned in for it, so you kind of should have known what you were getting in for. But first, and this is a question I get quite often, is what causes the leaves to change color? Is it because it's getting colder out? Is it because the daylight changes or what have you? But it's really, research has shown that in the fall, or in the autumn if you prefer, leaf color change is mostly controlled by changes in daylight. As we know, the days are getting shorter, even though with the last Sunday, our day started an hour earlier. Didn't change the length of the day any, of course. It just changes when the sun starts coming up for us at what time. So, but research has shown that in the fall, color change is triggered primarily by changes in the amount of sunlight. Now, conversely, in the spring, which we're not talking about today specifically, research there has shown that there's a huge difference, upwards of a 6 to 7 week difference from year to year, and when leaves come out in the spring, and that is largely controlled by temperature. So in the fall, even though it is getting cooler, finally, or sporadically, perhaps you could say, it's sunlight, and droughty conditions can start the color change early, as many of us have seen across Ohio this year. And a lot of the comments in the conversation I was having with Marnie and Kathy before this started, the three of us were kind of surprised at how bright the colors were, given how droughty our summer was, certainly in some parts of the state. But drought conditions can start that change early, as the trees start to shed their leaves just in response to moisture stress. Okay. Now, in leaves, there are three main colors or pigments that are present within the leaves. And the quantity of these pigments changes in the fall and dictates what the leaf color is going to be. Okay. The main pigment is chlorophyll. And chlorophyll is what gives leaves their green color. Okay. And the same with needles, conifer needles as well. And really, it's the most important of the pigments, since it's responsible for photosynthesis in plants. And of course, that includes trees. Now, photosynthesis is the process by which plants and trees as well take in carbon dioxide, and in the presence of sunlight or with energy from the sun, they convert that carbon dioxide into sugars and oxygen, right? And they give off the oxygen, and they keep the sugars within the plant itself, and the sugars are used to help the plant grow. So that's what photosynthesis happens during the day. What a lot of folks don't realize is that trees also, and plants in general, and trees in particular, for our discussion today, at night they give off carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is a byproduct of respiration, of cellular activity, just like it is for you and I. It's the exact same process in our trees as well. So at night, the trees tend to give off carbon dioxide. They give it off through the leaves, and it'll also come out through the roots as well. Okay. And remember, through the roots, they take in minerals and water. So as fall colors start to change, as daylight decreases, one of the pigments found in the leaves of trees, they're carotenoids. And these pigments include yellow and oranges, and eventually these will turn to brown in our leaves. Now, as with chlorophyll, these pigments are present in the leaves all year long. And typically, and we'll touch on this again a little bit later in the webinar, that, a good summer, with lots of moisture and whatnot, helps produce a lot of carotenoids in the leaves, so that when fall color change happens, the colors, those yellows and oranges, are much brighter and much more vibrant, which I expected this year, given the drought conditions we have, that those colors would be significantly dimmed, and they're not. At least in many places, they are not. Okay. And another example of the yellows or the carotenoids being released or exposed, if you will. And yet another one. So problem with pictures is I forget how many I put in on each slide. I should keep track of those. Now, as the days get shorter in the fall, photosynthesis slows down, eventually stopping, resulting in chlorophyll dying and unmasking the other pigments. Okay, and this change is usually gradual. I have a friend here in Columbus who grew up just north of Indianapolis, and she said they had the most amazing sugar maple tree in their yard, that in the fall the leaves would be striped, and it would have green, and it would have yellow, and it would have red on the leaves. And she said it was so pretty. And she said it did that every year, and she's never seen any other tree that did it like that. Well, I've seen lots of trees that do it like that. Personally, I think it was just a genetic thing in that tree, but who knows? But oftentimes, especially early, you can find all the colors in the trees. And there's a picture of kind of what she was seeing, with all three colors present at one time. And some more leaves. Fall color change usually starts in the northeast U.S. and moves south. Somehow my slides got mixed up here. I've lived all along this gradient. I grew up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. I've lived here in Ohio for 11 years now, and I lived in the Southeast for 14 years, and they're actually 17 years. And so I've seen this gradient, and my first fall in the South was really difficult because I was expecting to see fall colors at the end of September and October like I grew up with, and I didn't see them until the end of November. And so it was very odd. Species mix has a big influence on landscape level color change. This picture is of Lake of the Clouds and the Porcupine Mountains in the western Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Truly one of the most beautiful fall color sites I've ever seen. It is stunning. And part of what makes the fall color change in this part of the world, and northern Ohio especially, and moving further north, is the species mix we have. We have fewer species, and that tend to change color at about the same time. The further south you move, you have species that'll start changing color in October, others that'll change in December, and a whole bunch in between. And so there's a lot of color, and it lasts for a long time, but it's not very dramatic at a landscape kind of level. Okay, this picture here is from Georgia. And you can see and of course in the South too, there's a lot more pine than there is here. And so we'll talk about how they change color in a little bit. But at the landscape level, it's not the same. When I worked at Mississippi State, I was contacted by an organization wanting to do fall color tours in North Mississippi. And I told them why. I said, have you seen the fall colors in North Mississippi? It's not very dramatic. It's not like it is in Ohio. It's not like it is where I grew up in Michigan. nor let alone in New England. The favorable weather during the growing season supports leaf development, and again, that production of carotenoids, the yellows and the oranges. Warm spring weather with plenty of rain can really help make for more vibrant colors come fall. And that is just glorious. Love the colors on aspen. Weather also has a big impact on the production of anthocyanins, one of the other main pigments that we find in leaves. Anthocyanins are the colors that turn red and purple in the fall. And warm, sunny days in the fall with cool nights favor the red and purple colors. What leads to that is warm, sunny days, there's still photosynthesis occurring. And so there's some extra sugars in the leaves, and in the plant, or the tree in this case, uses those sugars to produce the anthocyanins, which will turn red and purple. Now, rainy or cloudy days in the fall and nights at or below freezing near the time of peak color will typically reduce the intensity of the reds and purples. That's a picture of a white oak that I took here a couple of years ago, and the color, the purple on it was just phenomenal. Incredible colors. Why is this in there again? Somebody got in, a gremlin broke in and messed up my presentation for you guys. I am so sorry. So again, as you move further south with species change, the landscape level color changes aren't quite there. It's not nearly as dramatic. Okay. I think it's back on track again. When the flow of water and sugar moving in and out of the leaf declines in the fall, the tree starts clogging up the connective tissues between the leaf and the twig that it's connected to. And this forms what's called an abscission layer. This abscission layer cuts off the vessels running from the twig into the leaf, and once complete, that's what makes the leaf fall off. It loses its connection to the tree and falls to the ground. Okay. Now, some species keep their leaves year-round. In Ohio, this is usually members of the beech family, which are beech and oaks. Okay, and in these cases, the abscission layer does not completely form, which leaves some connecting tissues for the leaf to cling with, and so the leaf falls in the spring when the new leaf buds come out and push the leaf out. And you can see this with so you drive around, especially in the wintertime, and you see these trees in the understory that with still kind of golden color looking leaves on them. Those are little beech trees. And those leaves are will stay on. Oak trees, I'm sure we've seen this as well. Again, those leaves stay on. And the term for this is called marcescence. So these marcescent species keep their leaves on longer than most of our other species, in the maples, then the ashes, then the elms, etc. Another question I get is, why do conifers not change leaf color like hardwoods do? What makes them be evergreen? What makes it so different? And well, we know if you've ever had a conifer tree in your yard, in particular a pine tree, and you look underneath it, you know that it sheds its needles at some point in time. And it does that periodically. Conifer needles change color and they fall off every year. It's just that not all of them change color and fall off every year like the hardwoods tend to do. Okay, most conifers in Ohio retain their needles for 2 to 4 years, with Norway spruce keeping them for upwards of 6 to 10 years. And that is in large part genetically controlled. I got a call from a residential community up near Delaware last fall, and they were all concerned, so very concerned, that these big spruce trees that they had at the entrance to go into their neighborhood, it looked like they were dying. They lost about half of their needles. And I went out and looked at their tree, and and walking around, and I explained this whole process to them. And I said, I suspect that it just, it's just lost half of its needles this year. I said, it happens. I said, give me a call in the spring and let me know what it looks like. And sure enough, they called me in the spring, and it was, new needles were flushing out, and they were happy, and everything was okay. But we've all seen this happen. The pine needles fall. They form a mat underneath your tree. Spruce needles do the same things. Fir needles do the same thing. And they'll form a a mat underneath your tree in which you won't have grasses growing underneath it. Part of that is because of shade. Part of that is because of the acidic conditions in the soil that promote the tree's growth. And then lastly is the thick layer of needles that have accumulated underneath that tree. Now, there are deciduous conifers, and this is an example of one that is native to parts of northeastern Ohio, and it's called eastern larch. It typically grows in really crummy places. It's places with saturated soil. It turns a beautiful golden color. And the needle fall is believed to be an adaptation to growing on poorer sites. So in the winter, even when it warms up, our pine trees and spruces, they'll start to photosynthesize if they still have green needles. With larch, since it grows in wet areas, it may not be able to take in the water that it needs to support photosynthesis and other metabolic activity happening. And so it's believed that they're dropping their needles as an adaptation to poor conditions. Now, if you go out west, there's the western larch, which is a beautiful, magnificent tree, especially compared to its eastern cousin, and it too is deciduous. And but it grows on some of the best sites. So I'm not so sure why western larch keeps its needles and why western larch needles fall. But certainly its eastern cousin does, and again, it's believed to be an adaptation to the poor sites in which it grows. There's a close-up of the larch needles. They grow in little tufts coming right off the branches, little teeny tiny cones. We have one alongside of the Ag Administration building on campus in the Chadwick Arboretum, and it's really, I did my PhD work working with eastern larch, and it's a pretty tree. And there's another little picture of a cluster of them in the woods. Okay. So what happens to the leaves and needles once they fall? Well, leaves typically, once they're on the ground, are eaten by worms and insects or decomposed by fungi and bacteria, and this happens fairly quickly. Hardwood leaves typically don't stick around for very long. They're fairly easy to decompose. And as they do, they add organic matter and nutrients back to the soil, recycling those nutrients for other plants to be able to take up. As it decomposes, it turns into kind of a mulch. And if any of you have ever collected needles or pine straw or anything like that, or other organic matter for mulch, you know that at the bottom, as it decomposes, it kind of turns a black color. That's rich, still high in organic matter. High in nutrients, good water holding capacity, all the things we want in a mulch. And that's what that helps do or does with our forests as well. Pine needles or conifer needles, on the other hand, have waxy coatings on the outside of them, are full of resins, and which makes them harder to decompose. And it can take several years for these needles to decompose completely. Again, as any of us who have conifers in our yard and the needles accumulate up underneath the tree, you know that they can stay there. They must stay there for quite a while to build up the way they do. Here's a nice picture, although that looks to be fairly cleared out in my opinion. But with the pine needles, some people will harvest them and collect them for pine straw. In fact, that's an industry in the southeast, especially with the longer needled pines, such as longleaf pine and slash pine, are preferred because the needles are so much longer. In my yard where I lived in Mississippi, I had a bunch of loblolly pine trees. In 1 year, I took out 17 truckloads of pine straw, and the city was collecting them. So I just took it to the dump site near one of the city parks and, made a big old mound, and then the city would use it as mulch because there's only so much of that stuff any one human being can use. But on an annual basis, I'd have 16, 17 truckloads of pine straw every year from my evergreen pine trees. Okay. So what can you do with these leaves and especially the needles? And I found this poem from someone named Douglas Florian, and it says you can watch them, kick them, catch them, pick them, snatch them, romp them, stomp them, hurl them, heave them, and if you want to, you can even leave them. I always rake them up, and get them off of my, remove them from my property, bag them up. Somebody will use them for mulch, or the city comes and picks them up. But there's nothing wrong with leaving them there either. They'll recycle those nutrients back into the soil, although they may mat down your lawn a little bit. I had a big silver maple in my backyard, and that thing must have had about a zillion leaves on it. Because my backyard, I could rake my backyard 2 or 3 times, and it would still be full of leaves. So, anyways, lots of things you can do with these leaves. As I like with this poem, how it sorts it out. Of course, as a kid, it was always fun to make a leaf pile and then jump into it, which in a lot of ways, now that I look back on it, was counterproductive because it would make a big mess, scatter the leaves around, and I'd have to rake them up again. But, it was always something fun to do in the fall. And here we have a picture of somebody who had raked up their pine straw and put it into a pile and was going to use it as mulch for their own uses. Again, if you're doing this commercially, especially in the South, they have pine straw balers, and they actually bale it up into little bales, like you get little bales of hay, you can get little bales of pine straw, and they'll sell that at the local home improvement stores or the co-ops for mulch. Man, isn't that just pretty? Fall, early fall, as the leaves are changing color, is my favorite time of year. Always has been. But then once the rain and snow and the cold starts, then it's not so much. Conversely, my next favorite time would be late spring, especially where I grew up, and we'd get a couple 100 inches of snow a year. Once that snow was gone and the road salt and the dirt that came with it was gone, then spring was pretty. Early spring where I grew up was not much fun. Everything was wet and cold and sloppy. Anyway, some conclusions. We're fortunate in Ohio to have the landscape level fall color experience we have. We can count on it happening every year from mid to late October, depending where in Ohio you are. And if you're further north in Ohio, fall color changes a little bit sooner than if you're in southeast Ohio, for example. And these leaves and needles can be raked up and used for mulch, and they can be played with, have your kids jump into leaf piles, or they can just be left alone. For us also in Ohio, this provides some economic opportunities for fall color tours. I know the Hocking Hills area is very famous for fall color, and it's one of their busier times of the year. They're just, the majesty of nature really comes out in the fall, and just the variety of the colors and the shapes of leaves and everything else we have is truly, truly remarkable. Again, all of our hardwoods lose their leaves every year, but not all of those leaves fall off. We have some species, again, that are said to be marcescent, and those species hold on to their leaves throughout, some of their leaves anyways, throughout the winter. And then when the new leaf buds form, they'll push off the old leaves and they'll finally fall to the ground. Most conifers lose part of their needles every year. On a 2 to 4 year rotation on average, the needles, will die off, and then new ones will grow in their place. Typically, if you look inside the crown of a conifer, especially a spruce, or if you have a spruce or fir in your yard, and you look on the interior, you won't find any needles there. It's because it's too dark and there's no sunlight, so the tree isn't going to, the needles that were there died and fell off, giving way to new growth and new needles to grow on the ends of the branches. Some conifers, and here in Ohio, of our native ones in particular, eastern larch will hold on to will lose their needles every year, and then flush out a new flush of needles in the spring. There's a picture of a beech tree with, holding on to those marcescent leaves, if you will. And another picture of larch, and this is a pretty typical growth place for larch. This was from northern Michigan, where I grew up, and you'll see the larch, or we also call it tamarack by a more common name, if you will. And in the background, there's other spruces and firs that are growing with it. And so this time of year especially, it's very easy to tell which ones are the larches and which ones are the spruces and firs. And I like this thought. If you feel like you're losing everything, remember that trees lose their leaves every year, and they still stand tall and wait for better days to come. And so I think that, as another inspirational thing or another thing to possibly like about fall or to get from the fall. I really like this thought and how, the trees, yet they lose their leaves, they keep coming back for more. If you still have questions, feel free to reach out to me, Kathy, or Marnie. We do have a fact sheet on Ohio Line on fall color change in Ohio, which is free and available to everybody. The U.S. Forest Service has a nice page where they talk about fall colors and in some cases fall color tours on the national forest, although it may be a touch late for that this year. And the Ohio DNR has a page where they keep track of and frequently update where peak color is throughout the state. Again, for most of us in northern Ohio, we are past peak color. Southeast and southwest Ohio, we're probably right about at peak color right now. So, those are just a few suggestions for additional information. And that is all that I have for you today. Thank you again for being here. I'm sorry that my PowerPoint got jumbled up. I'm not sure how I managed to do that, but I have uncanny abilities in that arena. Although it's been a while since it happened. And whoever has that nice little button buck in their yard, I hope they know that within the next year or two, it should be, should have a nice, decent sized rack on them for those, who like to look at, deer for that reason. Anyways, that's all I had for y'all today. Do we have any questions or comments?
Thank you so much, Andy. No questions as of yet, folks. If you have questions, go ahead and pop them in the Q&A box. I was trying to quickly pull up some of those links that you shared at the end. I don't know if you have them accessible and maybe you could pop them in the chat for folks, or you can send them to me afterwards and I can include them.
Yeah, I should be able to do that, Kath or Marnie. Good grief. I'm having quite a day today.
Okay, we do have a question from Dennis. Where does the southern border of less color start?
Wow, that's a good question. Honestly, I'm not entirely sure there is a southern border for that, but I would say as you get into, say, southern Kentucky, there starts to become more and more of the southern pines. And by that point, too, there's a much broader species mix than there is here in Ohio. And even Ohio has a much broader species mix than where I'm from in Michigan, northern Michigan. So I'd say probably central to southern Kentucky. When you get into Tennessee, there's much more pine, and certainly when you get into the coast, the Gulf coastal states, those forests are dominated by pine. And then the hardwoods could have anywhere up to 100 or more different species, all of which change color at different times during the fall. So I would say a good guess for that would be central to southern Kentucky, I think, is where that transition would probably start.
Great, thank you. Aaron is asking, if fall color intensity is largely driven by weather, how do nurseries identify and or select trees for cultivars known for fall color? Also asking, how do genetics play into fall color variety and intensity within one species?
Oh my goodness. Wow. I've never worked in a nursery, but I suspect that the nursery growers probably grow best what sells and what other people have bought over the years and people have seen them plant. So I'm not exactly sure how they decide what it is they're going to plant. Kathy, you may have some insight into that I don't have.
Not so much. I mean, I think that a lot of times it's how they select, so it's like if you're looking at other tree species and you see that they have this great fall color, you may genetically choose that tree. If you're doing cuttings and those kind of things, you'll go after those characteristics. So it's about what does the parent tree, let's say, display, and then they select for. I think about it as like thornless honey locust. We have thornless honey locust in the nursery industry because somebody found a thornless honey locust tree out in the woods and genetically took that material to create that nursery variety initially of thornless honey locust. So my instincts would be it's probably the same thought process, right? Is that you see something that has beautiful fall color and you kind of go in that direction with what you choose.
Yeah.
That's my gut. That's not my nursery knowledge.
Yeah, that makes sense to me too, Kath. That sounds right. Was
All
there
right.
the second part of that question, wasn't there, Marnie?
It was into genetics. How do
Okay.
genetics play into fall color variety and intensity within one species?
Yeah. That's interesting. And I don't know that anybody truly knows the answer to that. Just as, you can look at one sugar maple and and you see another sugar maple and another, but each one is a little bit different in some way. Just like all of us, we're all people and we're all a little bit different in some way. Sometimes you just luck out and get a tree that, produces more. Where I'm from, sugar maple is almost always yellow and orange. Down here, there's a lot of red with sugar maple. Which my wife, who's also a forester, she and I'll, have little arguments about that driving down the road. I'll say, wow, look at that beautiful sugar maple. She goes, it's not sugar maple just because it's orange. Not all sugar maple are orange. And I'm like, they are where I come from. There are genetic differences, but I'm not sure that anybody could, outside of a geneticist themselves, do a job of explaining why it is. Just some trees just have different, a little different genetic makeup to them, or maybe, their roots tapped into something really good and juicy underground and they got more water and nutrients from it. And because of that, their leaf color is better, or just the site they're on is better. There's all sorts of things that play together in that mix. And I think, site variation is probably as big in a player in that as genetic variation is.
I mean, I can remember when I built the house here, I had a riparian buffer planting down along the creek. I had a swamp white oak seedling growing down there that had beautiful red fall color. And I was like, man, I'm going to dig that sucker and it's going in the yard. So I dug it up, put it in the yard, and it's never had red leaves since. So,
oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. So there was definitely a difference.
Yeah.
What? I don't know, but it's never been red again. It goes kind of that dull yellow to brown and then keeps its leaves through the winter. So
tapped into something it liked there.
Yeah, there was definitely something that changed, because I just remember as we were finishing up the house, it was sitting this little seedling down there that was just this beautiful red. Flagged it, dug it, moved it. Didn't make any difference.
All right. Dennis is asking for the definition of your term tamarack.
Okay. Tamarack is just a common name, or a local name, if you will, for eastern larch. Where I come from and up in the Northeast, they call it tamarack. And so it's just another name. It's like calling a red maple a soft maple, or a sugar maple a hard maple, or I've heard it called rock hard maple. All those things. It's just another common name. I'm not sure how it got the name tamarack or what tamarack in and of itself means, but it's just another common name.
All right. Deborah is asking, if you want to use pine needles for mulch, do you apply it as you would hardwood mulch? Can you use it in all types of flower and or vegetable beds, or is there an acidity problem?
That's one thing I meant to address. I don't think there's an acidity problem with the needles. Yes, conifers tend to grow in more acidic places and on acidic soils. And yes, the needles decompose slowly, in part because those sites are more acidic, at least out in the woods in natural settings. But I don't think the needles themselves don't make things acidic. They decompose slowly, but research does not show that pine needles in and of themselves will make, a site more acidic. So I think it's perfect. I think you're safe to use them. As far as use in landscaping, I've seen them used everywhere bulk bark mulch is used, in flower beds, around homes, around bushes. I've seen them used everywhere with no ill effects.
Great. Chad is asking if the amount of daylight triggers the change in color, shouldn't all of Ohio and nearby states happen at the same time?
Well, those areas along the same parallel of, make sure I get my terminology right. Parallels of its longitude, isn't it, Kath? Parallels of longitude or parallels of latitudes go up and down, longitudes go side to side, right? Do I have it the other way around?
Latitude goes this way.
Latitude goes this way. Okay.
Longitude.
See?
Along the same parallel, yes, fall color will happen at about the same time. So, like in New England, where I grew up actually further north than just about everything in the lower 48 states, believe it or not, including in most of New England. There's just a little bit of Maine that's further north than where I grew up. And so as fall started, the fall color would be, if they showed a fall color map across like New England and northern Michigan, eventually it would move down into Wisconsin and Minnesota. That would all have the same color change at the same time. So as you move from like say from Lake Erie down to say we go Cleveland to Cincinnati, there's a several hundred miles difference with Cincinnati being several hundred miles further south. So they're going to have more daylight during the day for longer than what they're going to have in Cincinnati or in Cleveland. I'm sorry. And so that difference is probably a few weeks. And so that's why we have the color change in Ohio that starts at, mid-October ish, and it goes on to late October ish. So we have a 2 or 3 week time period in Ohio where we have peak colors moving from north to south. And it's the same thing as you go through New England, you move down south through New England, peak color change starts up in September, up in Maine, late September, early October. And as it moves down, as we move further south, that time of peak color changes. My son is in Virginia right now and in the Navy at Norfolk. And fall color for him is really coming up into full bloom now. And so, excuse me, which is different than last year when he was in Charleston, South Carolina, and fall color just kind of down there, it just kind of lasts for a while because of the species mix. But that's why all of Ohio doesn't change at the same time, because it's not all at the same latitude.
And genetics play a role in that timing as well. Some species just naturally go earlier than others. I always use the walnut as an example when you talk about falling leaves. They're the first to lose their leaves in the fall, but they're the last to leaf out in the spring. Yep. So that timing also plays in some of that change that you see in color.
Yeah, ash works much the same way. Mm-hmm. I had ash trees in my yard here in Ohio, and when I lived in Mississippi, and everything else would be leafed out, and my ash trees wouldn't be. And I'm like, I wonder if EAB has finally found me. Inevitably, I'd go out and I'd check the trees and not see any signs of emerald ash borer. And then all of a sudden, like the next day, the leaves are coming out. And so it was like my ash trees wanted me to go and check on them and make sure they were okay.
Thanks for checking. We'll leaf out now.
And so here where I am, I have some chinkapin oak that are still pretty green. They haven't turned yet. They look kind of like this outlier leaves, with no leaves around them, and they're sitting there with mostly green that are just starting to turn brown. So definitely timing there.
Yep.
Okay, Karen has looks like more of a comment. If you have red maples or cherry trees, you do not want them near in the pastures, as they are poisonous to horses, can cause foundering.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, that is true, Karen. Thank you for adding that. And then Mark is asking, do north versus south side of hills or elevation impact color?
Well, another interesting question.
Yeah.
I I depending on the hills like here in Ohio, I don't think it'd be much difference between north and south side of the hill, unless the hill was just that massive that it took up, longitudinally that much more space. You go out west, there is a difference, especially at higher elevations where the color change will start a little sooner. Where there it is more controlled by temperature. But here, I don't think there's much of a difference in this part of the world from a north facing slope to a south facing slope. There may be a day or so difference, or maybe a couple of days, but I don't think it'd be anything too dramatic.
Oh. Well, I think we have gone through all of the questions. Andy, what's your favorite fall color tree?
Well, where I'm from, it's sugar maple because it turns yellow and orange. You don't have any of these stinking reds.
Kathy, what's your favorite?
I mean, sugar maple is definitely one of them that's up there. I have some sweet gum planted in one of my plantings, and man, the color array that they put on is just phenomenal. I mean, I have one at the end of the drive right now that's got yellows and oranges and reds, that kind of reddish purple, which is why I planted them in the planting along the driveway, because I wanted them to be showy. So yeah, the sweet gum probably and black gum, both of them have such brilliant fall color that it's beautiful.
Yeah, I would have said black gum.
Is that yours?
Dennis, were you saying ginkgo? Not sure if that's what he meant in the chat or not. Yes, ginkgo, yeah.
Ginkgo turns up gold. I mean,
Yeah, gold and yellow.
it's about the only good thing that comes out of ginkgo.
Oh, Liza, bald cypress. Yes, that's a pretty one.
Kind of that rusty orangish red.
Yeah, yeah.
No.
Good.
Yep.
Hickory is a beautiful golden. Yes.
Yep.
Well, awesome. Well, thanks, Andy, so much. We appreciate this.
Welcome.
I did record. I will get this posted, folks, probably by the end of the day. If you have any further questions, feel free to reach out to Andy or myself or Kathy. And then, like I said, if you need credits for today, just reach out to Kathy or myself, and we will make sure you get what you need.
We can supply whatever documentation via for ISA or SAF to make certain you can get your credits after the fact. I apologize that we just didn't pull all the right levers for today. But we will take care of it.
Go out and enjoy this beautiful fall day. Have a good weekend, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Marty and Kat.